The sun over the northern desert was merciless. Molten eye, it baked the golden sands until they shimmered like a sea of fire. A vast and lethal expanse that had swallowed empires whole. Yet, nestled within this inferno, a miracle bloomed, a city-state, whose name was lost to all but its own people, and whispered as the pearl of the desert, was an oasis of impossible life. Its canals, drawn from a deep and ancient aquifer, webbed through districts of white limestone and sandstone, feeding lush gardens and nourishing a populace that knew prosperity in the heart of desolation. This prosperity was a recent vintage, barely a lifetime old. It had been purchased with blood and revolution, led by the ninth king, Cleopatra. He had overthrown a dynasty of tyrants who ruled for 3 centuries, treating the people as little more than chattel to be bled dry. Cleopatra, a man forged in the crucible of that suffering, had dedicated his life to nurturing the city, to transforming it from a barren outpost clinging to an underground river into a beacon of civilization. He moved the river itself, a feat of engineering that bordered on the miraculous, and with its life-giving water, he cultivated a kingdom. Now, Cleopatra was dying. The lion of the revolution was a withered creature of bone and parchment. His roars reduced to a rattling cough that echoed through the cavernous halls of the palace. His final duty, the most crucial of all, was to name a successor. The fate of the pearl rested on this choice. And in the heart of his youngest child, Cleopatra, a cold dread had taken root. She stood on a balcony overlooking the city, the cool night air a balm against her troubled thoughts. She was a scholar, a strategist, a diplomat. Her mind was a map of the kingdom's needs. Every canal, every granary, every trade route charted with meticulous care. The courtiers and generals admired her, their respect a tangible thing in the deferential bows and the weight they gave her words. Everyone saw her potential, her brilliance. Everyone, it seemed, but her father, to Cleopatra. A king was a symbol of strength, a warrior, a man. He saw his eldest son, Klikhaxlur, and saw a conqueror, brave, boisterous, and a master of the scimitar. Klikhaxlur's mind was a battlefield, not a ledger. He saw governance as an extension of conquest, a thing to be achieved through force of will rather than careful planning. Then there was Hotep, the second son, where Klikhaxlur was a roaring flame. Hotep was a flickering shadow, cursed with a sharp intellect but a frail spirit. He was a creature of indecision and envy. He saw slights in every shadow and coveted power, not for what he could do with it, but for what it would prove to others and to himself. Cleopatra loved them both, on her way. She saw the valor in Klikhaxlur and the wounded pride in Hotep. She yearned to serve the kingdom alongside them, a triumvirate of her father's bloodline guiding their people to a brighter future. But the old king's perception, as unyielding as the desert bedrock, would not allow it. A woman could be a consort, an advisor, a mother of kings. But a monarch, it was, in his own words, a great humiliation. The announcement, when it came, was no surprise, yet it struck her with the force of a physical blow. Cleopatra, from his deathbed, named Klikhaxlur his heir. The court erupted in feigned celebration. Klikhaxlur accepted the crown with a warrior's grim satisfaction, his hand already clenching as if gripping a sword instead of a scepter. Hotep's face was a mask of placid disappointment, but Cleopatra saw the poison brewing in his eyes. For herself, she felt a profound emptiness. It wasn't the loss of power that pained her, but the sting of her father's blindness, his inability to see her for who she was, not what she was. She resolved to be the sister the kingdom needed. She would be Klikhaxlur's most loyal advisor, her mind the whetstone upon which he could sharpen his reign. She presented him with detailed plans for expanding irrigation, for establishing new trade routes, for strengthening their defenses through diplomacy rather than aggression. Klikhaxlur would listen, a broad, indulgent smile on his face, and clap her on the shoulder. Excellent work, little sister. Head boom, a sharp mind for dusty scrolls. Leave the matters of men to me. He would then unroll a military map, his finger tracing paths of conquest. Why should we be a mere pearl when we can be the entire necklace? The cities of the Green Lands are fat and decadent. They are ripe for the taking. His ambition was a weed, growing wild and unchecked in the fertile soil of his newfound power. It terrified Cleopatra. Their army was strong enough to defend their home, but to launch a campaign of conquest, it was suicide. She pleaded with him, argued with him, but it was like reasoning with a sandstorm. His eyes held a feverish gleam, a hunger that went beyond a king's desire for legacy. The source of that fever, she would soon learn, was the whispers of his brother, Hotep, in the shadows of the court. Hotep fanned the flames of Klikhaxlur's ambition. Feeding him tales of legendary power, he spoke of the old tyrants, the ones their father had overthrown. He spoke of their source of power, the Forbidden Land, a necropolis on the edge of the desert where the spirit of the last and most terrible sorcerer king, Neferenka, was said to be sealed within a great tomb. They say Neferenkushman commanded armies of the dead, that he could wither crops with a word and summon storms from a clear sky. Hotep would hiss in the late hours of the night. Imagine such power in your hands. Brother, the world would bow to you. Hotep was playing a dangerous game. He believed he could control the fallout, that once Klikhaxlur had this power, he could manipulate his brutish brother through the shadows. He failed to understand that one does not play with hellfire and expect to control the inferno. Cleopatra discovered their plot through a network of loyal servants who were troubled by the new king's obsession. One night, she followed Klikhaxlur as he rode out from the city, a small contingent of his most fanatical guards in his wake. Her heart pounded against her ribs as their path led them straight towards the jagged, black peaks that marked the border of the Forbidden Land. She confronted him at the entrance to the necropolis, a vast chasm carved into the rock, rumored to be a wound in the earth that led straight to the underworld. Brother, what are you doing? She cried, her voice echoing in the dead air. This is madness. The stories are not just tales to frighten children. The evil here is real. Klikhaxlur turned, and in the stark moonlight, she saw that the man she knew was already gone. His eyes burned with an unholy light. Madness is ruling a patch of sand when an empire waits. He snarled. You see this kingdom as a garden to be tended. I see it as a stepping stone. The power within this tomb will grant me the strength to achieve what our father, in his weakness, never dared. He shoved her aside and marched into the darkness of the tomb, his guards following like dogs at his heel. Cleopatra stood frozen, the cold of the grave seeping into her bones. The darkness that her brother was so eagerly embracing was about to be unleashed upon them all, and she was powerless to stop it. The kingdom her father had built with a lifetime of hope was about to be drowned in a tide of ancient evil. Weeks turned into a suffocating month. A palpable wrongness settled over the pearl of the desert. The sky seemed a shade duller. The life-giving waters of the canals ran sluggish and murky. A blight crept into the fields, turning vibrant green shoots a sickly, withered brown. The people grew restless, their whispers of unease turning into murmurs of fear. Then, Klikhaxlur returned. He rode through the city gates, not as a king, but as a god of terror. His armor was no longer polished bronze, but a shifting, obsidian carapace that seemed fused to his skin. His eyes glowed with a venomous green light, and coiled around his arms and torso were spectral, shadowy serpents that hissed with ethereal venom. The guards who had followed him were changed, too, their faces gaunt and their movements unnaturally silent, their eyes holding the same sickening glow. He had found what he sought in the tomb of Neferenka. He had found the dark package, the serpent's heart, a crystallized vessel of the sorcerer king's malevolent soul. By embracing it, he had become a conduit for its power. His reign of terror began immediately. He declared the old laws void. The Council of Elders was disbanded, its members executed for treasonous caution. He conscripted every able-bodied man, not for an army, but for a slave legion, their wills broken by the spectral serpents that now infested the city. The pearl of the desert was no longer a kingdom. It was a crucible, being melted down to forge a weapon for Klikhaxlur's conquest. Hotep was horrified. This monstrous tyrant was not the easily manipulated brute he had envisioned. When he tried to reason with Klikhaxlur, To curb his excesses, his brother merely laughed. One of the spectral snakes lashed out, coiling around Hotep's throat, its cold, intangible scales burning his skin. "You lit the fuse, little brother," Klikhaxlur rasped, his voice a chorus of grinding stones. "Did you truly think you could command the explosion? You will serve me, or you will be the first offering to my new empire." Terrified and broken, Hotep became a puppet. His intellect now used to organize the logistics of his brother's monstrous regime. He had sought power and found only slavery. Cleopatra, working from the shadows, organized a resistance. She gathered loyal guards, wise elders who had escaped the purge, and common folk whose love for their home outweighed their fear. But it was like trying to fight a plague with poultices. For every one of Klikhaxlur's corrupted soldiers they struck down, 2 more rose, their bodies animated by the serpentine magic. The city was dying. The people were losing hope. One evening, in their hidden sanctuary, General Bastien, their father's most trusted commander and a man who had taught Cleopatra the art of strategy, slumped in defeat. "It's no use, my lady," he said, his voice heavy with despair. "We fight against magic, against a force that does not tire or bleed as we do. He drains the very life from the land and its people to fuel his power. We cannot win." His words struck Cleopatra with the force of a revelation. He drains the life to fuel his power. It was a cycle, a twisted, averse cycle of death-feeding power. If she was to fight him, she could not simply break the cycle. She had to seize control of it. There was only one path. She had to go to the source. She had to enter the tomb of Neferin Kusha, not to claim its power as her brother had, but to understand it, to find its antithesis, its weakness. Bastien and her followers begged her not to go, but her resolve was absolute. It was a will of iron, a core determination that her father had mistaken for stubbornness. This was her perpetual fury seal made manifest, a spirit that, once set on its course, could not be diminished, deterred, or transferred. She journeyed to the forbidden land alone. The entrance to the tomb, once merely dark and foreboding, now pulsed with a sickly green energy. The air was thick with the stench of decay and ancient magic. Taking a deep breath, she stepped into the abyss. Inside, the darkness was a living thing. It writhed with the whispers of damned souls. But Cleopatra was not her brother. She did not come seeking dominance. She came seeking knowledge, seeking balance. Her mind, trained in logic and history, became her shield. She navigated the treacherous passages, ignoring the horrifying illusions and temptations thrown in her path. She finally reached the central burial chamber. The massive, pure gold sarcophagus of Neferin Kusha lay open and empty. Klikhaxlur had taken the serpent's heart, but the lingering essence of its power saturated the very stone of the chamber. It was a power of absolute ends, life and death, creation and decay, a fury and peace. Her brother had only embraced the death, a decay, a fury. He had taken half of a whole, creating an imbalance that was now poisoning the world. As she stood at the precipice of this overwhelming energy, she did not try to command it. She opened herself to it. She sought to understand its dual nature. She let the raw, untamed magic flood her senses. It was an agony beyond comprehension, a torrent of life and death warring within her very soul. She saw the birth of stars in the collapse of mountains. She felt the joy of the first harvest and the final, rattling breath of the dying. To survive, she had to find the equilibrium. She became the fulcrum, the point of balance between two immense, opposing forces, the spectral energy. Seeing in her not a vessel for conquest, but a vessel for harmony, coalesced around her. It did not corrupt her as it had her brother. It merged with her. Serpentine patterns, like delicate silver tattoos, bloomed across her skin. Her eyes, once a warm, intelligent brown, now held the depth of the desert night, flecked with the gold of the morning sun. The power of the tomb was hers now, not as a weapon of conquest, but as an instrument of cosmic order. She was no longer just Cleopatra. She had become the Snake Queen, She felt the changes deep within her. She could feel the life force of the world around her, the vibrant pulse of living things and the cold stillness of the dead. She felt a connection to the very sarcophagus in the center of the room, the container of this immense power. It became her divine sanctuary, a metaphorical shield forged from her understanding of the final rest. With new purpose, she left the tomb. The world looked different to her. She could see the threads of life energy being siphoned from the desert by her brother's dark magic. She could see the pain and fear of her people as a physical stain upon the city. And she knew what she had to do. Cleopatra returned to the city not as a princess, but as an elemental force. The corrupted guards who patrolled the walls sensed her approach. They turned, their green eyes glowing with mindless malice, and charged. They expected to face a desperate woman. They faced a goddess. She raised a hand, and the very air around her shimmered. This was her first test of the life-death cycle. She drew upon her own immense well of life force, the vitality now coursing through her veins, and projected it outwards. But it was a wave of dual purpose. Towards her enemies, it was a torrent of decay. The spectral snakes animating the guards shrieked and dissolved as if touched by acid. The guards collapsed. The dark magic purged from them, leaving behind empty, lifeless husks. Simultaneously, the other half of the wave washed over the blighted fields surrounding the city. Where it passed, the withered brown receded, replaced by a surge of vibrant green. Life bloomed in the wake of her power. She was both reaper and sower, a walking embodiment of the desert's harsh duality. Merciless death and resilient life. Her return sent shockwaves through the resistance. They saw her, wreathed in a faint, serpentine aura, her presence both terrifying and awe-inspiring. They saw what she did to the corrupted guards and to the land itself, and the embers of hope they had nursed in secret roared into a blazing fire. They had a queen to rally behind. The battle for the pearl of the desert began. Cleopatra led the charge, a storm of controlled, focused power. She was no longer a strategist confined to maps and scrolls. The city itself was her game board, and she could see every piece, every move. Her powers were a marvel to behold. When Klikhaxlur's forces unleashed volleys of soul-withering curses, she simply stood her ground. At the start of the engagement, the protective energy of the tomb, her divine sanctuary, enveloped her. The curses washed over her like water over stone. Their potency drastically reduced. She stood untouched, a serene and immovable object against her brother's chaotic force. She taught her followers how to fight this new war. Do not let your anger consume you, she instructed. He feeds on fury and despair. Find your balance. She used her own powered balance to demonstrate, turning her enemy's strengths into her own. When Klikhaxlur's sorcerers drained the life force from prisoners to fuel their spells, Cleopatra enacted her own transfer. A shimmering, ethereal link would form, and 50 of that stolen life energy, that raw fury and vitality, would be siphoned away from the enemy and poured into her most wounded soldiers, mending their flesh and steeling their resolve. She turned her brother's vampiric magic into a font of healing for her own army. The tide began to turn. The resistance, once a frightened band of rebels, fought with the conviction of true believers. They were led by a queen who could not only command them, but could literally give them life. The final confrontation took place in the Grand Throne Room, the same room where their father had named Klikhaxlur king. The place was now desecrated, the limestone walls covered in pulsating, sickly green veins of energy. Klikhaxlur sat on the throne, no longer recognizably human. He was a behemoth of obsidian armor and writhing shadow serpents, the serpent's heart glowing balefully in his chest. Hotep stood beside him, Apale, trembling ghost. Sister, Klikhaxlur's voice boomed, a discordant symphony of 1,000 tortured voices. You went to our source, you drank from the well, but you only sipped where I gorged myself. You seek balance. I am power absolute. Kneel, and I may let you serve as my high priestess. You are not power, Cleopatra said, her voice calm and clear. Yet it resonated with an authority that shook the very foundations of the room. You are an imbalance, a cancer, and I am the cure. The battle that followed was cataclysmic. Klikhaxlur unleashed the full, untamed fury of the serpent's heart. Waves of pure necrotic energy crashed against Cleopatra's defenses. She weathered the storm, her divine sanctuary holding firm. He tried to shatter her will, to inflict a curse of pure despair that had broken armies. But her will was her own, her fury untouchable, perfectly shielded by her perpetual fury seal. The curse washed over her and vanished. Finding no purchase, General Bastian, fighting bravely at her side, cut a path through the elite corrupted guards towards the throne. He was a titan of martial prowess, but he was still mortal as he raised his scimitar to strike at Hotep. Klikhaxlur moved with impossible speed. A massive tendril of shadow lashed out, impaling the old general through the chest. Bastian crumpled to the ground, a deathly rattle in his throat. A cry of despair rose from the resistance fighters. Their champion had fallen, but Cleopatra did not falter. "Your fight is not over, old friend," she whispered. She reached out, and a soft, golden light enveloped Bastian's body. This was her ultimate gift, the power of revival. As the life was about to flee his body, her magic took hold. It poured 80 of her own formidable life force into him, stitching flesh and bone, reigniting the fading spark of his soul. A glowing sigil, the spirit mark, burned on his forehead. He would not feel pain, nor the relief of healing, not yet. For 2 turns of the cosmic clock, his fate was held in stasis, his accounts of damage and healing to be settled at the end. To the awe of all present, Bastian staggered to his feet, the gaping wound in his chest sealed by golden light. He looked down at himself, then at his queen, his eyes filled with a reverence that transcended loyalty. He was a man who had walked to the very edge of death and been called back. He let out a battle cry that was reborn and renewed, and threw himself back into the fray with the strength of 10 men. The sight of their resurrected general broke the morale of Klikhaxlur's remaining forces. They saw not a battle against a rival army, but a war against a goddess who held dominion over life and death itself. Enraged, Klikhaxlur focused his entire being on his sister. He abandoned all pretense of strategy and became a maelstrom of destruction. But this was what Cleopatra had been waiting for. He was all fury, all death. He had forgotten the other half of the cycle. She did not meet his final whisper charge with one of her own. Instead, she opened her arms. She dropped her defenses. "Brother, let there be balance," she said softly. He plunged his shadowy claws into her, expecting to rip her soul from her body. But instead of dying, she became a conduit. She enacted the life-death cycle not upon the room, but upon the 2 of them, the death energy he poured into her. She absorbed, channeled, and purified. The life energy within her, she poured back into him. It was an excruciating exchange. For him, the pure, untainted life force was an agony, burning away the corruption of the serpent's heart. He screamed as the obsidian armor cracked and fell away. As the shadow serpents dissolved into smoke, he saw, for the first time in months, with his own eyes, he saw his sister, her face a mask of serene pain, embracing him, healing him even as he tried to kill her. The serpent's heart in his chest shattered. The malevolent consciousness of Nephron Kersha, unable to exist in a balanced vessel, was annihilated. Klikhaxlur, the man, collapsed, the dark power purged. He was left broken, his mind shattered by the ordeal. But he was free. Cleopatra stood, the silver serpentine markings on her skin glowing with a soft, steady light. The throne room was silent, save for the weeping of Hotep, who had fallen to his knees. The war was over. She walked to the throne, not as a conqueror, but as a preserver. She looked out at her people, at her scarred but living city. She had paid an immense price. The power of the serpent, the duality of life and death, was now a permanent part of her. She would forever walk the line between the two. A queen of a world seen and unseen. She was Cleopatra, 9th of her name, the savior of the pearl, but in the hearts and minds of her people, and in the legends that would be whispered across the great desert for 1,000 years. She would be known by another name, the Snake Queen, the eternal guardian of the cycle, the mistress of the delicate, the deadly, and divine balance of all things.